going to be looking at Miss A, a 5th grade math teacher's lesson, and unpacking it a little bit. So right now we see that the standard is 5.3H, where students are going to be subtracting fractions with unlike denominators using pictorial models and properties of operations. So we see that the objective is highly aligned to the standard, where students will be able to subtract fractions with unlike denominators using the strategy of creating equivalent fractions using pictorial models. We also see that this teacher has dissected that standard and has identified what students should know and how they should be, what they should know and what they need to do to show that they know that concept. While we look at the exit ticket, we see that it is highly aligned to the standard as well as the assessment, being a concept, a lesson where students are learning this for the first time. We're starting at the basics. So we can see that this is kind of a release of knowledge to students. So we see that the exit ticket is highly aligned, where students are able to learn that skill. The teacher names the criteria for success for how students will be graded to show mastery. As we look at the independent practice, we can also see that independent practice is highly aligned to the exit ticket, where students are able to showcase that they got this and develop that skill. The teacher names what they are looking for when they are looking at each problem to kind of understand if students understand. So what we're going to be looking at in our lesson planning meeting is the concept development. Right? The teacher has identified three problems she wants to do with the class. We see that there's turning talks and guided questions. We really want to stamp here that students take ownership of that learning and that knowledge, and it's not so teacher heavy in the release of knowledge. So we really want to stamp here that we are meeting these turn-in talks, that we are giving the students that release of knowledge and power, and that we're looking for the discourse between the students collaborating with each other to better understand the concept, and where the teacher kind of facilitates that conversation.
So today we were learning about how to subtract fractions with unlike denominators in class. All right, what do you think went well today?
What went well today? Okay, so a lot of the students were able to use their prior knowledge from when we were adding and translate it to subtracting.
Okay.
So to me, that's a plus. We're retaining information, and then we're also knowing how to apply it. So I'm like, win, baby,
get it.
Yeah.
All right. What do you think though that they struggled with today?
One thing that I noticed that a lot of kiddos were not doing, they weren't going back and crossing out their fractional models.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah. So it's just they were good with the numbers, but however, if you looked at the end of module, which I know you did.
I did.
And when you look at our semester exams as well as STAR questions, they will just have the model on there where the kids have to determine what were the fractions, what was the fraction that was, what was the total fraction, and what was being subtracted. So it's very important that they're able to translate, the equation to the model.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying?
So how could we put that in the lesson for today if we were to
revamp it? So going forward, I think it's best if one of my do nows that I give them the model and see if they're able to
dissect it.
Yes. And create their own equation or understand what is happening
in that picture.
Exactly. Because I'm if they're just not doing it but they understand it, but if they're not doing it because they don't understand it, there's my gap. I need to go back there. So that's what I'll be more intentional about next time. Making sure.
And do you think that the questions that we asked them today are aligned to those end of module assessments?
Some of the questions were targeted to it, but I would say because it's still a
intro model.
Yes. So I'm building up their confidence, and then when I feel they feel confident how to do it, then I can ask more deeper level thinking questions to really see how deep they know the concept and if they're truly understanding every step.
But today was just intro, so they just need to know, do you know how to subtract?
They have to have the same denominator. And then I'm also checking, do you know how to create equivalent fractions? Because that is something that they should have learned in 4th grade. But based off of last year, I noticed that was a gap. And I actually did like a equivalent fraction like a couple days before you came in, just to get like a refresher. And some of the kids were able to grasp it really quickly, but some of them are still struggling. I mean, even when I'm looking at my data, you know how I have it in the quadrants? Yeah. When I get to that equivalent fraction, that is also a gap with some of my little kids. Like, they can do the multiples, but when it's creating that equivalent fraction that's like still... they get hung up right there. The yeah, they're like, I'm stopping. Yeah, like,
Yeah, no, I noticed that the questions were good. Students had strong independent work time. I would just say during concept development, do you feel like you're talking a lot?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, so I have one suggestion, one push that we can do. And I think that we can take those steps and give it to the students to do in turn and talk modes.
Okay.
You feel down with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
and then, so I like that idea, because then I'm like, when I present the do now, I can have them turn and talk instead of me guiding to see if they're able to create their
all
question.
the time.
Exactly. Right.
All the time. Save your voice. Okay. So I'm gonna show us one quick model of somebody doing it. Okay. Like a master person that showcased on YouTube, and then we'll kind of talk about how to implement it. Okay. Sound good? Sounds good. Okay. Let's watch. So after watching that video, what do you think are some ways that we could implement turn and talks, that strategy, into this classroom? Okay, so we use Eureka Math, and it's divided into 4 components. Okay. I can see myself really utilizing that strategy in the do now. So since the kids have already been introduced to the concept, and I've already identified my gap, right? Yeah. I can use that opportunity during their do now to do turn and talks to figure out, like, maybe I can make a mistake, or maybe I can present the model, and it's up to them to identify like what is the equation or what mistake was made when we were creating when we were solving this problem. Okay. You know, maybe using some of their exit ticket data, right? Like, where did this scholar go wrong? Where did this person go wrong? Exactly. Kind of giving them the chance to help each other. Exactly. Okay. Instead of me always like holding their hand and having them identify, do you see this? Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Now, just because I'm like, from watching that video, I see like the power of the students just taking ownership in their own learning and being collaborative. And when I was watching that video, I was like, oh, maybe I need to like sit students with different groups so kids can work with other, you know, just different types of kids than they're used to. To like just empower each other and kind of like help each other, you know, think differently about the problem instead of just having me, you know? Looking at our lessons, right, we saw that today we had a turn and talk. I heard you ask the question. Yeah. And then you just kind of like asked them and they were giving you the answers. Yeah. Right? So how can we make sure that we implement these in our classroom, in our so you're right, I did have it in there. So to help me, I think will probably be to write it in my PowerPoint. Okay. Put a big turn and talk for a minute. Okay. Yeah, put a timer a minute. And just like a reminder to me, so I'm not holding their hand, I'm creating opportunities for them. You got it right there. You're like, turn and talk. Exactly. Would you give them like, I think maybe giving them like a sentence stems to kind of get their thinking going would be really impactful, as well as making sure you're monitoring them. What do you think you would do if you heard them like saying the wrong thing, just like not giving you anything? So when I've done turn and talks in the past, and if kids are not having a conversation, I jump in. Sometimes I'll be like, hey, okay, what are we thinking about? All right, well, let's look at previous examples, or let's look at because most of the time I do have like an anchor chart on the board, some guidance, so I'll do that. Or sometimes if I hear another kid, like some other scholars having a great conversation, I'll be like, oh, like let's try to include them in the conversation, and see what their thoughts and see how we can collaborate with them. So it'll be like, I'll either jump in or I'll have them talk to another group and get their ideas, or refer them to like the anchor chart or whatever I have on the board to help guide them. Exactly. Awesome. All right, so I think we're pretty set here. So I think our next step just for you would be to add that turn and talk to the board, giving the kids that minute to talk to each other, discuss, kind of do no work, but discuss like, hey, how can I tell which fraction is greater? Then you monitor and then close it out, and call on one of those students so that the ownership is on the students, not so much on you. Got it. So, okay, so I got it. So my next step will be to actually incorporate the turn and talks in my PowerPoint so that I'm not forgetting them. Yeah, so that you remember, so that the kids do it. Exactly. I got it. Great. I like it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.